Hey guys, it's Den. One Piece spans over 1,000 chapters, dozens of arcs, and hundreds of years of in-universe history. From the mysterious Void Century to the rise of the Pirate King, from ancient weapons to modern revolutions, every event is connected in a timeline more epic than pretty much any other series. In this video, we're putting it all together, this entire One Piece timeline explained from the very beginning to where we are now. And at the end, we'll make a few speculations to where it will finish. But jumping straight into it, there's a few things we need to understand first. So essentially there are three timelines. We have the Age of the Sea Circle, the Age of Heaven, and then we kind of have the modern day timeline where, if something happened 1,000 years ago, we just say 1,000 years ago. But this will all become much clearer as we go through everything. The Age of the Sea Circle is the calendar used by Mont Blanc Noland in his logbook around 400 years ago, which was dated the year 1120. Based on exact dates given by Noland, the month-day division in this calendar appears to match the Gregorian calendar. So what we're saying here is the calendar Noland was using is pretty much a regular calendar that we use on a day-to-day basis in the real world. We don't know if the Sea Circle calendar is still used in the modern day in One Piece, or if it was ever used outside of Leneve Kingdom or the North Blue. But we can use information to identify the fact that that timeline or that date happened about 400 years ago. Again, don't worry if it's confusing, this will become clearer. Now, onto the Age of Heaven. This is the calendar that was used when Nico Robin pretended to recite the history of Alabasta from the poneglyph in the Tomb of the Kings. In reality, the poneglyph held information about Pluton, which was revealed in Wano. Due to the circumstances, it is unclear whether the information she provided was accurate. It's not exactly known where these dates sit in relation to everything else in the One Piece world because we never had any explicit references that we can cross-check, but there are some hints that give us some soft confirmation when this took place, and it fits in the whole grander scheme of the One Piece cycle. So a bit later we'll get into that and we'll explain how all that works and what likely happened 800 years before the Void Century. So I'm going to start with the Age of Heavens and then we'll go into the Age of the Sea Circle alongside the main timeline, and piece by piece we'll be able to put together what happened throughout the years in the One Piece world. So in the year 239 of the Age of Heavens, Kihira conquers Alabasta. In the year 260 Age of Heavens, the Baitian dynasty of Tamar begins its rule. In the year 306 Age of Heavens, the Great Taft Temple was completed in Eremalu. Finally, in the year 325 of the Age of Heavens, the hero of Altea, Mamudin, but then the sentence was cut off, so we never got confirmation on what Robin was actually going to say, suggesting that this is probably the most important piece of information we've got out of the 4 years that we were given from the Age of Heavens. All of this was given, as I said, when Robin was lying to Crocodile about Pluton. So while the accuracy isn't 100%, we can presume it's probably relevant and probably legit because she's from Ohara. It's thematically relevant here. So now I'm going to move into the main timeline, the one that we're in now. And as we go through it, it'll explain when the Age of Heavens took place and when the Age of Sea Circle took place and how everything fits in. So the oldest date we have in the One Piece world is the Tree of Knowledge, which was planted by the ancient people of Ohara 5,000 years ago, told to us in One Piece Yellow Card Grand Elements, page 233. It's just a basic description of the Tree of Knowledge, essentially. Now, 1,000 years later, which is 4,000 years before the present day, the Palace of Alabana was built. So 4,000 years before the current storyline, there was activity going on in Alabasta. In the Age of Heavens, there was mention of Alabasta, so we're starting to see a soft connection there. Now, skipping another 1,000 years forward, we get to 3,000 years before the main storyline, where a facility was built on Elbaf, told to us in 1144, when Lilith gives a rough estimate. Now, 1,500 years before the current storyline is when the Age of the Sea Circle likely started. We know this because 1,100 years ago, we saw that it was the year 402 in the Sea Circle calendar. So 1,100 plus the 400 gives us 1,500 years ago. That's when the Age of the Sea Circle started. 400 years after the Age of the Sea Circle started, so 1,100 years ago, that's when Shandora was built and was prospering, all of which is explained to us in chapter 261. 100 years later, so 1,000 years before the current timeline, Zunisha is born, which is hinted at because it's the earliest known sighting of the elephant, told to us in chapter 802. It's at this time that the Mink tribe isolate themselves from the outside world on the island of Zo, carried on the back of Zunisha. This is also when a quarrel between the Long Arm tribe and the Long Leg tribe begins, which probably parallels something to do with Emu and Joy Boy, because the Long Leg tribe was shown to offer their immortal souls to the devil so they could get revenge on the Long Arm tribe, which is where we see Brooke summoned. 100 years later, so 900 years before the current timeline, the Don Quixote family persecute the Tontatas. The Void Century begins, and in this period, Joy Boy ate the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika and became the very first pirate in history, revealed to us in 1114. A great civilization dominates the planet from one corner to the next, and great weapons of mass destructions are built, which is actually told us quite early on. It's chapter 395. It's during this year that the Iron Giant Emeth was constructed, and that Joy Boy attempted to raise the Noah with Poseidon's aid, but he breaks his end of the bargain to Fishman Island, and Noah was never raised, leaving it where the Straw Hats found it and awaiting its purpose to be fulfilled. So we see 900 years ago in the One Piece world, there was a lot of activity. The Void Century began, Joy Boy's very active. Potentially he was the one who built Emeth, considering he was involved with Noah and these other kind of plans that we see play out over centuries. But this is where we kind of get more into the actual details. So 70 years later, which is 830 years ago, Toki was born. The significance here is that it means that the Amatsuki clan were in Wano 830 years ago, which is during the Void Century. Now, 70 years ahead, we go to 800 years ago. This is around the time of the end of the Void Century. After a great war, Shandora is destroyed. This is when we believe Joy Boy stored a mythical treasure called the One Piece at the final island of the Grand Line. An organisation of 20 royals formed an alliance against the Great Kingdom and Joy Boy, defeating him in a great war, marking the end of the Void Century. It's during this time the sea rose by 200 meters, which is huge. That level of change will affect every single person on the planet undoubtedly, and could very well be the cleansing that the Gorosei have referred to in the past. In the same century, the ancient weapons also disappear under mysterious circumstances, and we see the poneglyphs are built by the Kazuki family. The 20 royals go on to create the world government and relocate to Marijua. We don't know when it was, but we know there was Lunarians up there prior to this. We've never been given a date, but this was alluded to when Marco is having kind of a flashback about Whitebeard. As they come to power, they control and censor everything that has happened in the last 100 years, at the same time outlawing worldwide the ability to research and read the poneglyphs. So laws were made probably around this time, making the Void Century and anything about it taboo, which likely includes the Ancient Kingdom and Joy Boy. The Riku family becomes the new rulers of Dressrosa after the Don Quixote family leave to go to Marijua, and they kind of make peace with the dwarves whom had suffered slavery at the hands of the Don Quixote family for the past 100 years. This is also the century that Zunisha commits a crime and is sentenced to walk the seas for eternity. Naturally, we've been given some more exposition about that through the Elbaf mural where Emu is standing on top of Zunisha. So it would appear that Zunisha was influenced by Emu and went against Joy Boy, which would explain why Zunisha's got ringed eyes, because like many of us have been speculating for 10 years or so, the ringed eyes mean possession. Pluton is hidden beneath the underground caverns of Wano. Nefertari D. Lily disappears on her way from Marijua to the Alabaster Kingdom. Cypherpole is established and is stationed at Eni's lobby to protect it. So again, so much is happening at the end of the Void Century. We've got the ancient weapons being hidden. We've got Lily disappearing under unknown circumstances, which we've speculated quite a lot about on the channel in previous videos. And Cypherpole going to Eni's lobby to protect it is important because Cypherpole deal with the world's secrets. So whatever happened at Eni's lobby, what happened to Eni's lobby, we can presume that Emu doesn't want people finding out. Or in other words, Emu was involved or caused the hole that was at Eni's lobby. Now, the following century, 700 years ago, construction of Tequila Wolf began somewhere in the East Blue for the safety of the world nobles against the world's rising sea level that was starting to cause problems globally. 59 years later, Oars is born. Now, this is probably not a coincidence. We've seen in Punk Hazard the world government do experiments making giants. So as the tides were rising and they were building these huge bridges, suddenly ancient giants are around, also known as continent pullers. So it could be that the world government created them for a purpose. 41 years after that, so 500 years ago, Oars was a ruler over a nation of people from around the world, but he dies of frostbite travelling through the northern lands and remains preserved in ice, which we get the details for in chapter 477. 40 years later, which is 460 years before the current timeline, a cure is found for tree fever that has plagued the land of Lenive, almost wiping out a majority of the inhabitants. So Nolan's country, Lenive, is suffering heavily from tree fever, which is before he was actually even born, before Calgary was born as well. 100 years later, we see it's the sea circle calendar 1120, which is when Nolan departs from Vera with his crew. What's interesting here is the mention of Vera, right? Because Vera is one of the 3 islands that Oda put in the Road of Laughtale as being candidates for where the final road poneglyph can be found. We know nothing about Vera except that Nolan was there. During his journey, Nolan arrives on Greenbit, where he protects the Tontata from humans. He is made a hero and a statue is erected in his honour. 2 years later, Nolan arrives on Jaya Island and brings about the end of a horrible disease that made the Shandia sick. So what we're seeing here is 100 years prior to this, in his own kingdom, the tree fever was killing people, but now they developed a cure, and now Nolan knows how to cure other people of this, which is to cut down the trees. Now, it's interesting because the trees in Skypiea house the souls of the dead. So when Nolan cuts down the trees, people get pretty terrified. However, Neptune tells us that a tradition that's out of time becomes a curse, and we see that manifested with this. So the trees were making people sick, and the answer was to cut them down so a new era can be born, right? Which subsequently heals people of tree fever and removes the sickness. It's during this time that Nola, the giant snake, is born as well. 4 years later, a large portion of Jaya is shot into the air by the Knock-Up Stream, which starts the war between the Skypieans and the Shandians. So the Shandians were down on the ground at first, and then they were shot up 400 years ago, which means they're now sharing land with the Skypieans, which leads into conflict. The following year, Nolan brings the king of Lenive to Jaya to show him the treasures of the Shandians. He sets sail with 3 ships, but 2 are lost as a sacrifice to protect the king in a storm. When they arrive on Jaya, there is no one living there, and the city of gold is gone, and that is because it's been shot up into the sky. The king's pretty pissed, and Nolan is executed 6 months later for the lies he told about the city of gold, and this is how he gets the epithet Nolan the Liar. And that's pretty much where we leave Nolan's story. But in the following century, we see the Germa kingdom reigns over the North Blue for 66 days as the Germa Empire. All of that stuff is told to us in chapter 871. However, it doesn't really tie into the rest of the timeline too much. 100 years later, which is 200 years prior to the current storyline, the Saint Briss leaves from the Briss Kingdom, carrying a crew towards the Grand Line. The crew makes it to Skypiea, but then vanishes without a trace. We still don't know anything about this ship, really. All it's done is given us some more context for the South Blue being very biblical because of its name, the Saint Briss, and it also gave us a mysterious portrait of a woman with a hole through her head, which kind of is reminiscent of a lot of the other portraits we've seen of dead women throughout One Piece. It's also 200 years ago that the world government makes an alliance with Fishman Island after centuries of discrimination. The institution of slavery is prohibited by the world government to secure a peace agreement. The Ryugu kingdom attends its first reverie, but doesn't attend another one until 200 years later, which we see in the current storyline with Shirahoshi. Incidentally, Emeth appears and attacks Marijois around this time too, but runs out of energy before causing damage. Saturn orders researchers to take it away and have it studied in secret, which eventually has it ending up at Egghead Island. There might be some significance to the fact that the fishmen were at the reverie 200 years ago when we consider the age of Sea Kings and the cycle by which Poseidon arrives. I understand that's probably a bit confusing. I do have a video on it, but basically, if a mermaid was given Sea King lineage, it might take about 200 years to have a child that becomes Poseidon, because it's indicated that it's not the first child, but it's the grandchild that becomes Poseidon. However, as I say, I've got a video on it if you want to hear the details. Now, over the next 100 years, we get the first main set of One Piece characters born. So we get like Dory, Broggy, Morley, Hatcher, Kashi, Carmel, Kureha, Saul. But other than that, there's nothing else really. It's more so Oda kind of prepping for us to come into the current timeline. However, something that does happen is 116 years ago, the people of Flevance discover amber lead. The world government realises that it's poisonous to the human body, but keep their research a secret for the sake of profit. Naturally, this is very important because the consequences of mining amber lead is that people's lifespan reduces generationally, which is in contrast to Emu, who seems to have extended life like the Gorosei. And this is where the history starts having more details because it ties into what's happening now. So 113 years ago, Carmel started her job as a child slaver under the name Mountain Witch. The name Witch is very interesting here because Kureha and Higurashi appear to be around the same age as Carmel, and both of them are classed as witches. Also, the mountain in Carmel's name is an allusion to Emu, who's often portrayed using the word mountain. 109 years ago, Dory and Broggy of the Giant Warrior Pirates are in their heyday of their infamy. Elsewhere, King Harold of Elbaf and his men raid a kingdom, however we don't know what the kingdom is. And we see all that in chapter 1152. During his travels he meets Ida in the Burnt Kingdom and begins to change his ways. So 109 years ago we see King Harold causing a lot of trouble and then becoming reformed. 4 years later, Harold declares to his subjects that he intends to learn more about the many cultures of the world and to bring the knowledge of said cultures back with him. So again, we're seeing more reformation of Harold. 3 years later, Dory and Broggy begin their duel on Little Garden, which we see way back in chapter 116. However, the circumstances that led to them being there are still a bit of a mystery and might tie into some Elbaf lore that comes up later in the arc. This is also the exact year that the disease carrying the Kestia tick is believed to be extinct, the one that made Nami sick in chapter 139. The following year, Morley was imprisoned in Impel Down. She later digs tunnels there and creates level 5.5, which we then see later occupied by a Carmeland. And if you think I mispronounced that, no, I did not. Morley is female. Pretty trippy, right? So now, without their two captains, the remnants of the Giant Warrior Pirates are captured and set to be executed by the Marines. However, Carmel convinces the Marines to let them go, and she joins them on their way back to Elbaf. There was a beam of light coming from the sky lighting her up, so the world government and Carmel were teaming up to play against the religious aspects of Elbathian culture in order to take advantage of the giant's strength, something that's been referenced multiple times in One Piece to be a world-changing fighting power and highly sought after. Shortly thereafter, Carmel opens the Sheep's House orphanage and begins to watch over abandoned children. Unbeknownst to the children, however, she's using the orphanage as a front to enhance her slavery ring and continues to do so for the next 37 years. What's super interesting here is that 37 years can actually be interpreted as 38 years because we don't know when the months, right? The specific months. So that's pretty strange because the God Valley incident was 38 years ago. Now, Rox was said originally to go to God Valley for one big score. And Carmel says she's retiring after the 38 years, after one big score. That one big score is implied to be Big Mum. Big Mum then goes on to join Rock's crew, and then Rox goes to God Valley for the one big score. So there's some very strange connections there. Now, 90 years before the present timeline is the year Brook was born, told to us in chapter 487. No doubt that'll become more relevant as time goes on, because he's probably seen some pretty important stuff. He's already alluded to seeing Roger as a rookie, as well as some other significant pirates, so that'll be an interesting thread to resolve. 82 years ago, Haradas left Burka to study the weather. We know this through his Vivra card. There's not much else to say about that, however, there's no doubt it will become significant later because Burka and Haradas's weather technology seems highly tied to Nami and Uranus. And we've predicted that at the end of Elbaf, at the top of the Adam Tree, there'll be a city called Asgard, or the remnants of a city, and that's where Uranus will be, as well as the path to the High West, which takes us to the Sky Islands. Now, the following year, the daimyo of the Kurozumi family poisoned the other 4 daimyos to try to gain the position of shogun. However, Kazuki Sukiyaki is born, becoming the new heir of the shogun, causing the Kurozumi family to lose its power. The head of the family committed seppuku as punishment, and the other members of the family began to be hunted down. So 81 years ago, the Kurozumi made a go at becoming shogun with some pretty treacherous methods. However, they were caught out and then they were persecuted. However, we know that remnants of the clan, such as Higurashi, did survive. And it's their plans that culminated over the next few decades into the whole situation in Wano with Orochi. Okay, so now we go to 67 years prior to the modern One Piece timeline, and we see Haradas again, and his colleagues have completed the construction of Wetheria. The following year, Haradas and his colleagues start to study the weather across the world, which has alluded to perhaps play a big part in how Vegapunk made some of the technology he has on Egghead. But now we jump 3 years forward, to 63 years ago. Lin was dropped off at Elbaf by her birth parents, never to see them again. She's brought in by Mother Carmel at the Sheep's House orphanage. This is also the same year that, shortly after Loki's birth, his mother, Queen Estrid, throws him into Elbaf's underworld, yet he manages to pull himself out. So we see Big Mum abandoned by her parents in this year, and we see Loki abandoned by his mother in this year. On the 7th day of fasting, 5 days before the winter solstice festival, Linlin destroys a village on Elbaf over a craving of Semler, killing Jorul in the process. Because of all of this, Carmel is forced to relocate Sheep's house elsewhere, but we've never been told specifically where it is. A little detail that's pretty important here is that Big Mum lasted 6 days of the fast out of the 7. On the 7th is when she wilded out. Kaido managed to do 6 attacks based on the Buddha, but didn't manage to do the 7th. This pattern occurs in other places in One Piece, but what Oda's telling us here is that this person got close to being a Joy Boy figure, but didn't quite make it. And it's because of that they become the way they are now. Once Carmel has relocated, that's when we see Linlin's 6th birthday, where it is implied that she eats Carmel and the other children. However, we're not too sure, and there's plenty of theories out there about what happened to them. Stroizen witnesses all of this and goes over to a young Linlin and grooms her into creating a dream country, he calls it, which then leads to Totoland, and all of that's explained in chapter 868. The following year we cut back to Elbaf, and Queen Estrid dies a year after giving birth to Loki, while natural disasters occur in the country around the same time. So for some reason, Oda is showing us that around the exact same time, when Linlin is given up by her parents, awful things happen, and eventually it leads to the demise of her mother figure. Loki is also tossed away, and a year later, his mother figure dies, and natural disasters are occurring, so there's some sort of bad vibes definitely going on here. Let me know if you have any theories below in the comments, or if you think this could be Ragnarok, or what's happening. Now, 56 years ago is when Rox invades the Reverie and captures 5 kings for ransom. He breaks into Pangaea Castle and encounters Emu and Gunko, threatening to return to the room in the future. While fleeing, he kills a marine admiral and clashes with King Harold, helping the giant escape soon after. As a result of all of this chaos, Rox earns his first bounty. So while we don't have much information on Rox, we know that because this was his first bounty, whatever Rox was doing before, which must have been something because he's so powerful, he was likely under the authority of the world government, or a situation whereby he wouldn't be getting a bounty. Okay, 3 years later, which is 53 years prior to the current storyline, Odin is starting to waste royal funds in the Red Light District and kind of just cause problems, which we see in chapter 960. It's during this year that Loki really gets comfortable in the underground and makes friends with all the animals and sets them loose on villages. The following year, 52 years ago, Laboon arrives at Reverse Mountain with the Rumbar pirates. He is left behind with Crocus at the Twin Capes to wait for them. Gold D. Roger is recognised as a rookie. Kozaburo saves the East Blue locals from bandits and founded a village which he called Shimitsuki Village. 10 out of the 25 Wano residents settled down in this village, but we don't know what happened to the other 15 or where they settled. The following year, Odin is shown still getting into fights, gambling, being drunk, etc., causing problems. Now, 50 years ago exactly, the Rumbar pirates are forced to split into 2 after half the crew, including Captain Yorkie, contract an incurable disease. The disease actually is reminiscent of tree fever, however, we've never had explicit confirmation of what it was. Brook takes control over the healthy half of the crew, and Yorkie goes with the sick half of the crew. The Rumbar pirates are annihilated by an unknown assailant in the Florian Triangle, leaving no survivors, which we see in chapter 487. A year later, Brook's soul, thanks to the Yomi Yomi Nomi, finds his body, only to realise that it's rotted away, leaving only his skeleton and afro intact. It's during this year as well that Odin's issues kind of peak, and he kills someone and was sentenced to hard labour in the stone quarry. While he's in there, he climbs the ranks until he runs that place. So we have an unruly leader who's spending lots of royal money, and now he's paying for his consequences, and he's going through like what you'd call like a training arc in a way, right? Like he's being disciplined. It's also 49 years ago that we first hear rumblings of Kaido being revered as the ultimate soldier. However, he's not under Rock's crew at this time. The next year, Rox, Shiki, Stussy, Whitebeard, Ochoku, Ganzui, and Marlon make landfall in Elbaf and meet Loki and King Harold, asking the king to join their ranks. However, Harold denies. The following year, which is 47 years ago, Kuma is born in Saul Bay Kingdom to his father, Clap, and an unnamed woman. Now we've got the hard copies of the translations, we can see that Clap was a pastor, which is a type of priest of a Christian or Catholic church, and Kuma is then later named a pastor also. So basically, Kuma was born to a man of the church, and they lived in a church at first. Now, the following year, the Vodka Kingdom tries to enlist Kaido into the Marines to join the next reverie. The year after that, so 45 years ago, Charlotte Katakuri filled his mouth with too much stuff and it rips open after eating donuts, so that gives him the distinctive smile. In Wano, the royal capital experiences a serious drought, and Odin diverts a river straight to the capital, causing it to flood. So he takes this opportunity to use the flood to escape to sea so he doesn't get caught. So we're being shown that after Odin's time in prison, he's trying now to do the right thing for the country. However, he does it clumsily and causes more destruction. The following year, Oda kidnaps women from the capital each night and forms a harem. The girls follow him of their own free will, but their lovers still try to get them back. This causes fighting to escalate, and at one point the Hyogoro family tries to stop the fight but fails. Now, also during this year, the Rocks Pirates are officially formed and set their base in Hachinosu, which is when Kaido and Kyo join the Rocks Pirates. The Roger Pirates clash with the Kuja Pirates, Vice Admiral Garp confronts Roger, and the two of them proceed to battle. It's said at this time that this is when the first clashes between Roger, Zebek, and Garp started taking place. 43 years ago, due to being part of the Buccaneer race, Clapp, his wife, and Kuma are captured by government agents and enslaved to the world nobles. This is also the same year that Katakuri eats the Moki Moki, which we're told in his Vibra card. The year after that, so 42 years ago, Boodle and his followers flee to Organ Island from pirate attacks and they set up Orange Town, which we learn all the way back in chapter 14. It's also during this year that Shaki gives up pirating to open a bar on the Sabaody archipelago. So 2 years after Shaki meets Rayleigh and they have that little romantic encounter, Shaki leaves pirating and the whole Kuja system and sets up a bar in a different part of the world. The following year is when Odin has the fight with the mountain god, which leads to his exile. So we're seeing very similar stuff to Noland here. The boar was attacking the village, but because people worshipped the boar, they didn't know what to do. Odin kills the boar and then he's excommunicated from the society, even though at this point he has learned that this is what's necessary. So we're showing now that Odin has matured into someone who needs to do what he does, however it goes against the status quo, leading him to be exiled. This gives space for Higurashi to conspire with Orochi. 2 years later, Odin does manage to get the gang of people together, which later become his retainers, and his father allows him back and gives him a region, making Odin the daimyo of that region and allowing him to keep his followers as his official retainers. It's also 39 years ago that Vegapunk creates Mats. Furthermore, Goldie Roger and his crew became the first people to reach Lodestar Island, the island at the end of the log pose. But this takes us to the big incident the following year, the God Valley incident 38 years ago. The world nobles host their native hunting competition every 3 years, and this year it's on God Valley. The competition is interrupted by the arrival of the Rocks Pirates, who are seeking to reclaim a treasure that the world nobles stole from Hachinosu, known as the Pirate Crown Jewel. Monkey D. Garp and Goldie Roger end up teaming up to defeat the Rocks Pirates, which results in the subsequent death of Rocks as far as we know, and Garp earning his title as the Hero of Marines. Now, I've got lots of thoughts about what actually happened at God Valley, which I've covered in many videos, and it seems very likely that Rocks was Garp's mentor at one time, and the situation between them two parallels what happened between Garp and Kobe at the Rocky Port incident. During the chaos of the whole God Valley incident, Kuma eats the Nikyu Nomi and saves himself and several other slaves, including Eva and Ginny. It's during this event that Shanks is found as a baby by the Roger Pirates inside a treasure chest. We know that Figelin Garling of the Gods Knights is crowned a champion following the God Valley incident, but other than that, that's pretty much all the main details we have about the situation. Interestingly, the following year, Dr. Hiruluk goes to Drum Island from the West Blue, where the God Valley incident took place, and he begins his research into finding a cure for a sickness of the heart that plagues his homeland. This kind of alludes to the fact that Hiruluk might have seen something at God Valley, may have seen rocks or something along them lines. Now, 36 years ago, Vegapunk's discovery of the lineage factor is published in the World Economy newspaper. Unfortunately, 2 years after that, Kaido frees Aba, aka King, from the 3rd Research Institute and recruits him into the pirate crew. So we're seeing here that Vegapunk published a paper on lineage factor, and then 2 years later the world government are experimenting on special races to exploit lineage factor. The following year is when Homing decides to give up his divine position as a celestial dragon, which also lowers the status of the rest of the Don Quixote family. This is when Doflamingo's mum dies. Now some time has passed since the God Valley incident. The survivors of the Rocks pirate crew start recruiting their own crew members, which we see in chapter 962. It's also during this year that Inarashi and Nekomamushi wash up on Wano's shores after leaving Zou, where they, along with Kawamatsu, are tortured by the locals, but are saved by Odin, who recruits him as his retainer. And this is when Yasui has Odin's samurai trained to be pretty highly skilled. The year after this, so 32 years ago, Cutty Flam and his parents enter the Grand Line. However, we really do not have much confirmed solidly about Frankie. We did manage to speculate that his parents were probably pirate, mads scientists, etc., and we do have videos on it, but there's still a lot to be unpacked about Frankie's lineage, particularly around his parents. 2 years later, so 30 years ago, in the Sorbet Kingdom, Bokori begins implementing corrupt policies that target the elderly, forcing them to work to pay their heavenly tributes or face imprisonment without food. This leads to Kuma and Ginny to hold Sunday healings to relieve the old people's pain free of charge. This is when it's alluded to that Kuma is a pastor just like his dad, so we're seeing Kuma's development in contrast to King Bokori's development, which represents the world government. It's the same year that Don Chinzhao fights Garp as well and has his head permanently bent, which gives him that grudge against Garp. But what's actually interesting is Garp is super strong, so Don Chinzhao's shockwaves, which are said to be really strong as well and very highly defensive, they clearly are super powerful, and we might see something like them types of powers used with the Holy Knights later on in the story. Garp is also training Kuzan during this year, doing the whole battleship bags that we saw, and some more details are given in his Vivre card. At the end of this year is when Odin leaves Wano along with all of his retainers and takes a trial to join the Whitebeard pirates. Despite failing the trial, Whitebeard lets him stay on the crew because he saved Toki. Yeah, and so I should probably mention that it's around this time that Toki arrives after travelling through time using her devil fruit power. And she says something along the lines of she doesn't mind how long it takes her to get back to Wano because she's with Odin, implying that Odin's very familiar to her, and as a Joy Boy figure, it suggests that Toki knew Joy Boy 830 years ago. Now, we move forward 2 years to 28 years ago. Goldie Roger discovers he has a fatal disease. So, preparing for what will be his greatest journey, he enters the Grand Line and recruits Crocus as a ship doctor. It's also 28 years ago when Kaido arrives at Wano and starts conspiring alongside Higurashi to put Orochi in place. Nico Olivia leaves Ohara and her daughter Robin to embark on a poneglyph expedition. 27 years ago, the Roger pirates face off against pirate Shiki in the Battle of Ed War. Roger escapes while Shiki suffers massive losses and gets a steering wheel implanted into his head. Obviously, there's kind of movies and filler that allude to this sort of stuff, and Oda, out of all of them, I believe he's confirmed that Shiki stuff is canon, despite it not necessarily featuring in manga. However, if you are really familiar with One Piece, you'll know that pretty much all of it's canon anyway. A lot of the filler just adds to the content of the lore that Oda's kind of going for anyway. This is where we start moving into the more modern timeline as well. 26 years ago, Neptune becomes king of the Ryugu Palace. Lola and Chiffon are born, and also Queen joins the Beast Pirates. What's interesting about this is Frankie is abandoned at Scrap Island the same year. And I mentioned earlier about Frankie maybe having mad scientist pirate lineage, and we know that Queen had a child at some point, so it's softly implied that Frankie is Queen's child, which is probably disappointing for a lot of people. But the interesting thing about this is something that pretty much nobody ever touches on, is when you put Queen side by side with Zeph, you can see that the characters are clearly inspired. So it would appear that Queen might be Frankie's dad and Zeph is Frankie's uncle, or something along them lines. But moving back to Roger, him and the Whitebeard pirates have a battle that takes 3 days and 3 nights. And during the 4th day, they make peace. This all happens the same year, so 26 years ago. Roger borrows Odin for his journey, and Inarashi and Nekomamushi also join alongside him. It's just after this when Roger arrives in Sky Pier and makes Odin engrave the message near the poneglyph. This plays into a larger theme of people engraving messages and kind of adds to the idea that there might be a message engraved at Laugh-Tale, the history of the world, or Joy Boy drew a picture or something like that. Shortly after this is when Roger is taken to Zou and he sees the road poneglyphs under the Whale Forest. It's also during this year that Charlie predicts the mermaid princess will be born in 10 years. And also, Clover travels to Punk Hazard to speak with Vegapunk, requesting him to help study the Void Century with the other scholars, though Vegapunk refuses. Clover reveals his D lineage to Vegapunk and vows that the voices of the past will be heard, which is something then Vegapunk reiterates in his speech, where he says that he believes the Roger Pirates heard the voices from the purest source. All of this is revealed from 1120 onwards. The following year, 25 years ago, Monkey D. Dragon gains notoriety as a captain of the Freedom Fighters, as he was covered in newspapers and labelled a wanting man. This is when we see in Kuma's flashback, Kuma's looking at the bounty poster and kind of is being inspired by him and says that he's somebody's hero. Wano is starting to fall into disrepair and getting worse and worse, and a man refuses to work in the weapons factory, causing him to be executed. Subsequently, Odin's samurai attack the flower capital in rage. However, the beast pirates raided Odin's castle in Kuri, but fail in their mission to kill Momo when Toki sends him and his sister ahead in time, leaving herself behind to be killed. The Roger pirates complete their journey to Laftel, having conquered the entire Grand Line, and so Roger becomes known as the Pirate King. Shortly afterwards, Roger disbands his pirate crew, allowing them to return to peaceful lives of their own choosing. Kazuki Odin dreams of opening the borders of Wano country in 20 years' time. So if Odin was to open the borders of Wano in 20 years, that would take us to 5 years prior to the modern timeline, and they're still up, which means he didn't do it. Just as Charlie predicted the coming of the Mermaid Princess, Charlie this year predicts the coming of the Great Pirate Era, which starts the following year. Not really much of a reach of a prediction, but fair play, we'll give it to her. During this year is when Odin and Orochi really get into their beef as well, and it culminates with Odin dancing naked in the street for 5 years, and the state of Wano continued to deteriorate. So that's the entire timeline up to the Great Pirate Era. The Great Pirate Era starts 24 years ago, so we've covered 5,000 years ago all the way up to 25 years ago. The part of the timeline before Luffy's journey is called the Great Pirate Era. Now, when did that happen? Well, 24 years ago, the Pirate King Goldie Roger turns himself into the Marines and is sentenced to death. Roger's speech before his death leads pirates to the Grand Line to seek out his hidden treasure, dubbed the One Piece. This event marks the beginning of an era called the Great Pirate Era. Upon hearing of the capture of Roger, and that Roger will be executed within a week, Shiki goes on a rampage throughout Marineford before being brought down by Sengoku and Monkey D. Garp. He is sent to level 6 of Impel Down for his actions. Shanks begins his journey as a pirate captain by asking Buggy to join his crew, but he declines and runs off. So we're marking the beginning of Shanks' journey as a pirate captain 24 years ago. The legendary shipwright Tom is put on trial for building Goldie Roger's ship, the Oro Jackson. He is given a 10-year stay of execution to complete his idea of a sea train and be exonerated of his crime. Heracles loses all of his friends due to the dangers of the Boyne Archipelago. However, we don't know much about that stuff at all, and I'm hoping that soon we get some spice, because I don't know, I do get the feeling that he's gonna play some sort of spicy role in the future. The Boyne Archipelago itself is pretty sus. It connects to Green Bit of Dressrosa as well as the Greenstone Forest that we saw Big Mum's homies in. So yeah, there's a lot of strange lore around that location. The following year, Ryuma's grave is robbed by Moria and his corpse along with Shizui is stolen. Moria and his crew fight the beast pirates and are subsequently massacred, leaving Moria as the lone survivor. Considering Moria's kind of elusive connections to Davy Jones, this could be some sort of foreshadowing that Davy was left alone at some point. The year after this, 22 years ago, Nico Olvia is captured by the Marines and her comrades are killed. Jaguar D. Sol frees her and deserts the Marines. Olvia returns to Ohara and her daughter, Nico Robin, meets Saul. It's also this year that the Ohara incident takes place. Ohara is burned to the ground by a buster call summoned by the CP9. Professor Clover, Olvia, and all of the citizens of Ohara are subsequently killed, and Nico Robin, the sole survivor, begins her life on the run from the world government with a 79 million berry bounty. Jaguar D. Sol is frozen by Kuzan, but is eventually thawed out by the raging fires. The thing to take note here is you're seeing a giant being frozen and then thawed later on, right? So this evokes Ragnarok. Around this time, Gaimon arrives at the island of rare animals, and through a mishap is trapped inside a treasure chest. He is left behind by his crew. So this is similar to a lot of other situations we've been talking about, so Heracles is another good example, somebody who ends up on their own. This could evoke Davy. Hachi saves Rayleigh out of the sea and subsequently befriends him. Shiki escapes from Impel Down. It's also when Shanks first meets Yasop while sailing near Gecko Island, and Ace is born. But unfortunately, his mum, Portus de Rouge, dies shortly after from holding in the birth for an unnaturally long amount of time. Sol leads a group of giants to retrieve the books that the scholars had thrown into the lake in Ohara after the Ohara incident, and transports these books to Elbath. Kuma protests against the corruption of King Bakori and the slavery of his citizens, causing Kuma to retaliate against the royal army, which then leads to him being imprisoned along with Ginny and the other Protestants. Soon after, they are rescued by Eva and Dragon and manage to force Bakori into exile, and shortly after this is when they form the Revolutionary Army. Last thing for this year as well, as this is the year that Sabo's born. There's a few interesting people born this year. You've got Sabo, Sugar, Beppo, Ideo, Nojiko, Helmeppo, Charlotte Raisin, Koza, Shimatsuki Kawina, and Nero, for example. Now, 21 years ago, before the current timeline, Vinsmoke Judge attempts to genetically alter his unborn quadruplet sons in their mother's womb in order to give them superhuman capabilities and remove any sense of empathy that they have, right? Standard weekend. However, Sora takes a highly dangerous drug to combat its effects. 3 of their sons are successfully modified, while the drug causes their 3rd son to be born as a normal human. The drug also causes Sora to develop a terminal illness that lasts for a few years before eventually killing her. So that evokes the whole women dying from love sickness, the picture on the St. Brice with the woman with the hole in, the whole Lily Nefertari thing, Vivi's now being captured. So a lot of women seem to get sick and die in One Piece. Probably the most recent example would be Ginny, right? And then that cycle is eventually broken by Kuma, Luffy, and Vegapunk through Bonnie. The following year, 20 years ago, Sol is met by a perfect clone of Vegapunk when he visited the library of Elbaf. Whitebeard claims Fishman Island under his protection, and in doing so, pirates were not allowed to harm or capture the residents there. On Elbaf, Jaguardi Sol establishes the Walrus School at King Harold's request. Okay, so what this represents here, the whole school situation, is that King Harold isn't just changing the image of his country, he's genuinely trying to change the culture of his country through education of the children, right? Children play a massive role in One Piece. We know that their perspectives are developed when they're young through either trauma or other things like that, which Dofi's told us and other people, Smoker, Eustace Kid told us that. So this is quite an important thing here. Also, Kazuki Odin and the 9 Red Scabbards tried to defeat Kaido to open the borders of Wano, but fail. Odin is executed by Kaido and Orochi. Before Toki's death, she quickly uses the powers of the Toki Nomi to send her son with the Ame no Habakiri and their retainers to safety 20 years into the future. I think it's literally like a few hours later that Kurozumi Higurashi is then killed by Kaido. Semimaru dies of old age, Inuarashi and Nekomamushi begin their feud, and Yamato is imprisoned in a cave by Kaido for wanting to be like Odin. He befriends 3 samurai while in there and is read Odin's logbook by them before having his chains cut free. The samurai Shimatsuki Ushimaru, Fugetsu Omuzubi, and Uzuki Tempura make one final effort to kill Kaido and avenge Odin before being killed themselves. Further west up the Grand Line, Scopper Gaban moves to Elbaf and meets Ripley. And also, elsewhere, Belmere, a marine, is caught in battle between marines and pirates in the Oikot Kingdom. She survives and takes 2 orphans she finds, Nami and Nojiko, back to Kokoyashi village. She later adopts both girls as her daughters, and yeah, unfortunately we know what happens after that. The following year, so 19 years prior to the current timeline, Boa Hancock and her sisters are kidnapped and become slaves of the Celestial Dragons. The Red Hair Pirates rescued an island from a rival pirate crew, and Shanks adopted the orphan 2-year-old Uta, having found her inside a chest that they had looted at that time. So yeah, Uta isn't strictly super canon, even though people have said and Oda has said she's pretty much canon. But the reason why it's not really important is because, like a lot of the movies and stuff, this is just a direct parallel to what's going on. So with other characters, you're not going to have them being found born in a chest by Shanks, a character that's been born in a chest. You can only do this with someone like Uta because she's like semi-filler and stuff like that. So all we're being shown here is that Shanks was found in a chest. And yes, he found his daughter in a chest, but it's kind of irrelevant. It's just like foreshadowing that Shanks was, and the effects that can have on somebody's life and their perspectives. So in other words, it's just a mini exploration of the theme, let's say. Now, the following year, Ringo falls into the hands of Kaido and Orochi. Onimaru starts to protect the weapons left on the graves against the Beast Pirates. It's also this year, 18 years ago, that Vivi was born, Kobe was born, Kami was born, and Marianne is born, right? That's very spicy. All of these characters are pretty important. Kami, for example, is the mermaid that's surrounded by the 5 mermaid quintuplets, which are Nika, Yonka, Sanka, I think it's Ichika, and then Yonka too. Next year, 17 years ago, Queen Otohime begins her campaign of gathering signatures from her fellow fishmen and merfolk in order to appease the world government so that fishmen and humans can coexist together in peace. An incident on an island leaves 500 soldiers being held hostage by pirates. The pirates demand their captain be made the king of the island in exchange for the release of the 500 captives. The world government sends in one 13-year-old boy to end the hostage situation, and he kills the 500 soldiers and then the pirates when they open fire on him. The boy later goes on to become the top killing machine of the secret Cypherpole 9, Rob Lucci. Little side note as well, we do see Hattori around Lucci as a child, so Hattori has been around for a long time and might play a role here. But moving on, an unnamed king of an unnamed kingdom visits Kamabaka Kingdom on Momoiro Island. After he returned, he was Nakama. The incident tore the kingdom and the family apart, and they were later exiled. Bele, son of this unnamed king, became a pirate and would later blame Eva for this incident. So Portus D, Ace and Sabo start saving up money in order to buy a pirate ship, leave Dawn Island and become pirates. Tony Chopper is born on Drum Island. He becomes an outcast of his herd because of his blue nose. So Chopper is born on Drum, a winter island, and he looks very different, and so he's segregated. So again, we're having another person who's being outcast and exiled, and they're isolated. This character also very much ties to Davy Jones again, so it's another example of how it seems that this is foreshadowing for Davy being isolated, maybe from his allies or from his kin. It's also the same year that Virgo passes on the name Corazon to Don Quixote Rocinante. Now, 16 years ago, Fisher Tiger, who was enslaved by the Celestial Dragons for several years, breaks free and heads back to Fishman Island. He talks with King Neptune about deciding to go back to Marijois and free all of the slaves that he regretfully left behind. This is ultra important. Fisher Tiger is a Joy Boy figure, and what Fisher Tiger did was he was liberated. He went all the way to one side of the world and then all the way back. So in this case, it's all the way to the bottom of the ocean, Fishman Island, and then all the way back up the red line to Marijois, right? This is exactly what we expect of people like Joy Boy. He went all the way up to Laugh-Tale, learned something, and then came all the way back to Dawn Island. Roger made the exact same trip. Luffy is expected to make the exact same trip. Shanks started in the West Blue, went all the way to the East Blue to Luffy, and then came all the way back to the West Blue to Laugh-Tale, right? So this is key to understanding that there's like an oscillation of these heroes, or even the Straw Hats. They move up and down, or all the way along and all the way back, which is pretty much exactly what the myth about Kaido and the fact he has a carp fruit and now he's a dragon, if you know about the myth with the carp, that is exactly what's going on here. Another common myth that deals with this is when a monk is at the bottom of a mountain and then they go to the top of the mountain and they think they've reached the peak, but really they actually have to go all the way back down to tell the people about what they found at the peak. Okay, so that is the key motif here, and it's very important to the One Piece story. The extermination of the people of Flevance also occurs 16 years ago. Law is left the lone survivor and is recruited to the Don Quixote Pirates. Virgo left the Don Quixote Pirates to go on a secret mission. Now, also 16 years ago, Shirahoshi was born, Rebecca was born, Pudding was born, and of course everyone's favourite, Karu. Now, 15 years ago, a year after escaping, the adventurer Fisher Tiger goes back and scales the Red Line, as we spoke about, in order to attack Marijois, starting a rebellion that ultimately frees all of the slaves of the Celestial Dragons, including Boa Hancock and her sisters. Fisher Tiger rebrands the mark of the Celestial Dragons on the freed fishmen slaves into the mark of the sun and forms the Sun Pirates, okay? So now we can see that the effect of going all the way to one side and then coming all the way back results in the liberation of slaves. Luffy is on his way to Laugh-Tale. When he gets to the end of the Grand Line, he's going to turn around, come back, probably to save Vivi, right? So he goes all the way back, and when he does this, that will result in the liberation of slaves. The Boa sisters are found by Gloriosa, Silver's Rayleigh and Shaki, who take them back to Amazon Lily. Under the orders of Dofi, Virgo joins the Marines. The Nox expedition party becomes the Nox Pirates after being chased by the world government for searching for poneglyphs. So here we have Nox, which is Latin for night, and these guys are demonized, turned into pirates because they're looking for poneglyphs, which are attached to the Will of D, right? The Will of D is associated with the moon, so yeah, this all fits quite well. A quick aside as well, Foxy's boxing license is also revoked as he's caught cheating with a weapon this year, so that's a clue as to how Davy Jones was beaten, because Davy backfight, right? So in other words, whoever opposed Davy, Lucky Emu or whoever it was cheated by using a weapon. For those who follow the channel, you're going to know that that weapon is Uranus. Now, 14 years ago, Elbath Prince Loki and Jarl returned to Elbath's Aurust castle, only to discover King Harold impaled by his own soldiers. Soon after, a scuffle ensued that resulted in the theft of the royal family's devil fruit, and Jarl being stabbed through the head. Loki is blamed for all three incidents and flees the country. While Harold dies, Jarl survives, and Shanks and Scopper Gaban investigate the incident. If you want to hear some theories on that, we do have a video on the royal devil fruit and how we're pretty confident we know where it is, we know what fruit it was and where it's gone, and I'll give you a clue: it went up into the Sky Islands. Tom's workers complete the first sea train, the Puffing Tom. Beppo leaves Zoe at the age of 8 to chase after his elder brother Zeppo. When he climbed down Zoe to get a view of the sea, he was swept away. He then boards a ship heading for the North Blue. Spandam persuades the five elders into giving him the authority to seek out the blueprints of Pluton. Virgo enters G5 base after personally requesting it, and the revolutionary captain of the Eastern Forces, Ginny, is captured by a world noble. The following year, so 13 years ago, while being transported on a world government ship, the Gomu Gomu is stolen by the red-haired pirates. I think it was specifically Lucky Roo that actually grabbed the chest and the fruit. Who's Who, a member of CP9 tasked with guarding the fruit, is put into prison for failing to protect it. Later that year, the Red Hair Pirates arrive at Fuchsia Village on Dawn Island. It's during this year that Shimatsuki Kozuburo gave Zoro a pair of swords to aid in his training. Vivi becomes the vice leader of the Sansan clan. Totu and his son Koza set off from Alabana to set up a village in the oasis of Yuba. Sachi and Penguin's parents die in a tsunami. They are raised by Shachi's aunt and uncle, who make them do illegal activities. The Kuja Empress Tritoma dies from love sickness. Boa Hancock becomes the new Empress of the Kuja and captain of the Kuja Pirates. She is also given a position within the 7 Warlords of the Sea. Don Quixote, Rosinante, and Law travel to Minion Island to steal the Opie Opinomi to save Law's life, but discovered by the Don Quixote family after accidentally giving an intelligence letter to Virgo, a member of Doflamingo's crew, undercover as a marine. Rosinante is killed by his brother, and the island undergoes the birdcage, which kills everyone except a boy that was a member of the local pirate crew. Doflamingo later recruits Sugar and Monet to his family. Sanji is expelled in the same year from the Vinsmoke family at the age of 8 by his father, Vinsmoke Judge, and he is allowed to leave the Germa Kingdom while they are invading a country in the East Blue. He boards a nearby cruise ship called the Orbit and works there as a trainee chef for the next 2 years. While wandering around Swallow Island, Beppo is bullied by 2 delinquents named Sachi and Penguin. Law witnesses the beating, and Sachi and Penguin pick a fight with him. Law defeats them and Beppo joins up with him. Later the same year, Kawamatsu and Onimaru start to hide the weapons from grave robbers in Wano. Eventually, the Kappa gets locked up in Udon after trying to procure food from the flower capital and eats rotten fish every day for the next 13 years. This is also the same year Foxy eats the Noro Noro Nomi. Now, the next year is 12 years ago and is one of the most important years in the entire timeline. Sugar, aged 10, eats the Hobby Hobby Nomi. As a side effect of the devil fruit, she remains biologically 10 years old forever, something that we know has strong connections to Emu. Redleg Zeph and his cook pirates sail to the Grand Line to find the All Blue. Ginny returns to Sorbet Kingdom after 2 years of her capture and abuse from the world nobles, carrying a newborn child with her that she leaves at the church before passing away from Sapphire Scale. Kuma arrives at the church to find the child, to which he would begin raising her, naming her Jewelry Bonnie. Monkey D. Luffy, aged 7, accidentally eats the Gomu Gomu Nomi kept by red-hair pirates, giving him rubber powers and the inability to swim. Higuma is eaten by a Sea King that attempts to eat Luffy but is saved by Shanks. The latter's left arm is ultimately ripped off by the Sea King. Shanks leaves Luffy's hometown after staying there for almost a year. Shortly after Shanks' departure, Luffy is taken by his grandfather Monkey D. Garp to train with Curly de Dan and meets his adopted brother Portus D. Ace. Luffy soon forms a brotherhood with Ace and Sabo based on their shared desire to become pirates. The Celestial Dragons come to visit the Goa Kingdom on Dawn Island. In preparation for their arrival, the kingdom's royals hire the Blue Jam pirates to set fire to the Grey Terminal, but most who reside there are saved from being burnt to death by Monkey D. Dragon and the revolutionaries. Sabo is attacked by the world noble Saint Jalmac and presumed dead. He is rescued by Dragon but loses his memories and joins the revolutionaries. Shanks arrives in Sabaody Archipelago and meets Rayleigh. The pirate captain Montblanc Cricket arrives at Jaya. He stays to search for the truth about whether his ancestor was a liar so that he may be liberated from his family curse. His crew abandons him shortly afterward. Chow Chow's owner, Hocker, sets up his pet shop in Orangetown the same year. The famous actress Victoria Sindri dies in a tragic accident. Dr. Hogback meets the warlord of the sea, Gecko Moria, along with Absalom and Perona. Hachi visits Shakuyaku and Rayleigh for the first time after joining the Sun Pirates. The revolutionaries start to look for Nico Robin. The Sun Pirates meet Koala, a young girl who was a slave of the Celestial Dragons. Fisher Tiger rebrands her slave mark into the Mark of the Sun, making her the first human to bear the Sun Pirates emblem. Upon returning Koala to her home island, Fisher Tiger is ambushed by a group of Marines led by Rear Admiral Strawberry. After barely escaping the island with a Marine ship stolen by his crew, Tiger chooses to die rather than receive a transfusion of the human blood on the ship. Angered by Fisher Tiger's death, Arlong heads back to Full Shout Island to get revenge on the humans who betrayed Tiger, only to be defeated and captured by Borsellino. He is then imprisoned in Impel Down. Now, the following year, 11 years ago, Jinbei agrees to the world government's terms and becomes one of the 7 warlords of the sea, which allows Arlong to be released from prison. Unfortunately, this led to a massive disagreement between Jinbei and Arlong that caused the Sun Pirates to disband into 3 factions: the Arlong Pirates, the Macro Pirates, and Jinbei's crew. It's also 11 years ago that Zeph returns from the Grand Line. A storm sinks the Orbit and Zeph's pirate ship. Zeph and Sanji end up stranded on an island with very little food for 85 days and are eventually saved. After this, the Baratie is opened. Who's Who also breaks out of prison this year. Kuina and Zoro make a promise for one of them to become the greatest swordspeople, but after Kuina dies, Kuoshiro gives Zoro the Wado Ichimonji to reach his goal. 10 years ago, after capturing ships holding heavenly tribute for the Celestial Dragons and blackmailing the world government for the position, Doflamingo becomes a warlord of the sea. Doflamingo frames Rico Doldo III and his soldiers for various crimes against their own citizens before swooping in and claiming the position of King of Dressrosa. Scarlet is killed by Don Quixote pirate Diamante. Arlong invades Kokoyasi village and begins to build his empire. Belmia is murdered by him and Nami is conscripted into the Arlong Pirates. Tom again stands trial for creating the Oro Jackson after the 10-year stay of execution to build the sea train, extended by 4 years so the rail network could be finished. Cypherpole 5, led by Spandam, frames Tom, who is carted away to Ennie's lobby. Cutty Flam, also known as Frankie, is presumed dead after attempting to stop the sea train that was carrying Tom, who unfortunately is executed shortly after that. Queen Otohime is assassinated by Hody Jones, who frames a human for it, causing an uproar on Fishman Island. Princess Shirahoshi is marked by Vanderdecken IX, making her a target for his powers. Hody steals the energy pills from the Tamate box and resigns from the Neptune army. In case of another theft, the Minister of the Right places explosives inside the box that will detonate the moment it is opened. Shirahoshi is locked inside Hard Shell Tower at Ryugu Palace to protect her from Deccan's projectile gifts and threats. Peckham's leads the other minks of the Nox Pirates who could not continue their journey, leaving just Pedro and Zeppo. Later, Peckham's and his group arrive at Big Mum's territory. There, their lives were saved and they entered into her care. Minatomo sells the blueprints to Kaido's mansion at a pawn shop. Sometime later, Ashura Doji stole the blueprints from Rakuda and ran over to Kuri with them. After hearing about Davy Jones, Foxy starts to amass a crew through Davy backflights. Despite Ashura Doji's warning to wait, many of his friends head to Onigashima to fight Kaido back in Wano. They eventually get killed. Now, the following year is 9 years ago, and a violent war occurs on Kuriagana Island, coating the island in blood and dead bodies and ingraining a violent personality into the human drills of the island. So this is Gloom Island, the one that we see Mihawk on. Koala also joins the Rev army this year, but other than that, that's about it. And so we go to 8 years ago where Hiraluk finds Chopper and saves his life. He takes Chopper in as an assistant and surrogate son. Ganfall is replaced as the god of Skypiea in the same year by Enel through a coup d'etat. A meeting is held at Marijois with the World Council to discuss Dragon and his revolutionary movement. And then we move to 7 years ago. right? 7 years ago is when the Usopp pirates were formed. Hiriluk dies, and upon his death, Chopper goes to live with Kureha, who begins to teach him how to be a real doctor. Kuma is told by a doctor that Bonnie's sapphire scales is incurable, and it will take effect when Bonnie turns 10, forcing him to avoid telling Bonnie the truth. Nico Robin enters the Grand Line and encounters the Red Line. Also, Rob Lucci, Kaku, and Khalifa from Cypherpole 9 go undercover and join the Galilar Company in order to learn more about Pluton's blueprints. Bueno goes to Water 7 with them but gets work as a bartender instead. Brook is captured on Thriller Bark, where his shadow is taken by Gecko Moria and transferred to the corpse of the samurai Ryuma. Brook manages to escape after wreaking havoc on Thriller Bark and creating his legacy among its inhabitants as the Humming Swordsman. Now, 6 years ago is when Bakori returns to the Sorbet Kingdom and attempts to burn his former citizens alive. He and his forces are, however, stopped by Kuma in an event that would be labelled as the Solar Revolution. Afterwards, Kuma would be made the official king of the Sorbet Kingdom. Cutty Flam shows up alive at Water 7. He receives Pluton's blueprints from Iceberg, and Frankie assumes the name Frankie. Nico Robin is hired by Crocodile into Baroque Works as his partner during the same year, so this is all 6 years ago. On the Blue Seas, Loki is defeated and captured by Shanks. He is brought back to Elbath and is subsequently imprisoned on the Treasure Tree Adam, within the country's underworld. It's also when Shanks acquired the status of Emperor. Now, 5 years ago, Captain Kuro fakes his own death and takes on the name Calidor. He becomes the butler for Kaya's family. A drought starts in Alabasta, with the king being suspected of causing it with the use of dance powder. Axham Morgan is honoured for bringing in the infamous Captain Kuro and begins his rise to power in the Marines. The Frankie family begins to collect 200 million berry. Portgusty Ace, aged 17, leaves Luffy's hometown. Pedro and Zeppo, who continued searching for poneglyphs, eventually set their sights on Big Mum's poneglyph. They infiltrate Whole Cake Island in an attempt to steal the poneglyph from Big Mum, and, by coincidence, Pedro and Peckhams come face to face once again. Pedro and Zeppo are defeated and forced to spin Big Mum's punishment wheel. Zeppo subsequently lands on the 100 Years option, and Big Mum, using the powers of the Sorrow Nomi, steals his remaining 30 years, killing him. She initially plans to take the remaining 70 from Pedro, though she agrees to Peckham's pleas to reduce the punishment by a decade. Pedro then gouges out his own eye in an effort to further quell her anger, and impressed by this, she removes only 50 years from his lifespan. Now, 4 years ago, Vivi and Igaram join Baroque Works to find out more information on who's behind it all. The Spade Pirates are founded by Ace and Masked Deuce. Kaya's parents die, and soon after Kaya falls ill herself. Kobe accidentally ends up as the chore boy for the pirate Alvida. Also, in defiance of Dr. Vegapunk, Caesar Clown performs an experiment involving chemical weaponry on Punk Hazard. The experiment destroys the island's entire ecosystem and leaves many prisoners paralyzed. Amigasa village experiences a famine, and Ace and his crew were captured by the villagers of Amigasa who stole their food. The pirates freed themselves but were able to stay in the village as guests for a few weeks. Tama takes a liking to Ace and decides to become a kunoichi for when he returns. Ace and his crew arrive on Onigashima to fight Kaido. He fights Yamato, and as they fight, Ace learns Yamato's desire to leave Wano country. Ace defeats the warlord Hanafuda, causing a need for a replacement after his expulsion. Hanafuda is later killed by enemy pirates on his way to see his children, Ulti and Page 1, but Kaido subsequently looks after the two and recruits them into his crew. Kuma and Bonnie find Vegapunk after the incident on Punk Hazard and request if he can cure Bonnie's sapphire scale. Vegapunk agrees on the condition that he can study and clone Kuma's body to create cyborgs he would then go on to dub as pacifistas, with Saturn overhearing the conversation. Kizaru arrives at Vegapunk's island along with a marine fleet with X-Drake on board, and they surround the island. Saturn on a Denden Mushi relays various terms Kuma needs to follow before Bonnie can be cured, including joining 7 Warlords of the Sea as a replacement for the one Ace defeated, becoming a human weapon and having his memories erased. Kuma agrees to these terms, and for the next 6 months, Bonnie and Kuma would undergo the treatment for the sapphire scale and to modify Kuma's body, though during this time, Kuma and Bonnie would eat and dance with Vegapunk, Sentomaru and Kizaru. After a total of 6 months, Bonnie would be returned to the Sorbet Kingdom under government watch from Cypherpole 8 Agent Alpha. During this time, news would spread all over the world that Kuma was the newly elected warlord. Now we move on to 3 years ago. On Mount Columbo, a 16-year-old Luffy was training a special attack he planned to use for later while Kuma observed him from a distance, thinking back to a conversation Kuma had had with Dragon before Dragon disappeared shortly after. Luffy vaguely senses his presence before going back to train. Sometime after, he writes multiple letters to Bonnie, but they were intercepted by Alpha and ripped up. Vegapunk works on Kuma's modifications while speaking with Stussy on whether a clone with will or a human with no will was more of a tragic life. Kuma asked Vegapunk on what it would mean to lose his free will, to which the scientist explains that it would mean that Kuma would lose all emotions and memory, but he would ensure that he would maintain conscious thought for about 1 more year, to which Kuma decided to write another letter to Bonnie for her birthday. On September the 1st, Bonnie celebrates her 9th birthday with the residents of Sorbet Kingdom, but later is deeply upset when she learned another letter didn't get sent, which is because Alpha's hiding all the letters. Hokka goes to the hospital and never returns, leaving Chow Chow alone. Cavendish appears in the New World the same year as a powerful new super rookie, and Green Bull starts his latest fast. Okay, so that brings us all the way up to where the story starts. So not the current timeline, but 2 years prior, so just before the time skip. Now, the original plan was to just cover the entire thing and go through, but instead, now I've got sick and my voice is real bad. Instead, what I'm going to do is just do another hour and a half of just the pre-time skip and post-time skip all the way up to where we are now. And on top of that, we've also recorded the entire events of the God Valleys since chapter 1162's come out. So we've got some quite comprehensive longer videos coming out soon. On that note as well, we do have some more theory videos coming out, Mega Theory, particularly around Blackbeard, and the fact that he's going to use Pudding to read Garp's memories, and then after reading Garp's memories, he's going to learn that Garp rejected taking him on as a son the way he did Luffy, Ace, and Sabo, and then that's going to lead to him using the Kage no Mi to essentially revive Zebek. So that's something else we've got coming. But anyway, to the point. Why have I done the timeline video when usually we cover theories? Well, basically, we have a pretty important theory that no one's covered before, and it underpins pretty much the entire timeline, which is that basically every 4 years in the real world we have a leap year, and it seems to be the same in the One Piece world. And this is foreshadowed by Panda Man and his girlfriend, who both their birthdays occur on leap years, I think February 29th. So the idea is that every 4 years something special happens, which is why the Nolan story took place 400 years ago, and then the Void Century ended 800 years ago. These are all multiples of 4. So yeah, we'll be breaking that down and explaining why this is so important to understanding how long the story is going to be. We might even be able to make some predictions on what chapter the story ends as well. So make sure you're subbed, stick around. I'm sorry that the voice did change, probably like towards the end of the video. I'm super sick. But I do appreciate any of you who have stuck this far with it, and much love. If you have made it this far, you've just won a free drink at the Spider Cafe on me. So thank you very much. No fancy outro this time, I just need to go to bed and, recover. So, muchos lovos, big loves, super loves, stroke a cat, be nice to other people, and peace.